Hello, and welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast, perspectives on aviation lives, lifestyles, and business.
Well, welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast, where we talk about aviation lives, lifestyles, and business, and sometimes just whatever, and have a little fun bantering back and forth about general aviation and sometimes professional aviation. That's kind of the direction we're going to go today. So I'm Chris Kirk. I'm here with Todd Mitten, and we're glad to be together doing these podcasts today. I just want to mention that if you haven't done so already, would you please take the time to subscribe and to share our podcast with others? This is not a money-making endeavor for us. We're not getting any money off of this, but it's just fun, and we've gotten some. We've had some feedback from some pretty interesting folks out there that are listening, and we just kind of like to know that. So we hope it's beneficial to you, and moreover, that's just fun. So anyway, Todd, you want to take it and run with it?
Well, Chris, great to be back, as always. We always have a good time with these, as you've mentioned. Our listeners may not realize that Chris has recently become an international jet captain, as I like to refer to it. And this is the real deal. This isn't the international light like I fly these days.
But you've been there.
No, I know. But anyway, you're now flying an Airbus A330 and across the North Atlantic and the Pacific for a major airline. And I thought listeners might be interested in kind of learning about that aspect of flying. It's not something that you often get a peek into that world behind the curtain, I don't think. I mean, you kind of can learn about airline flying a little bit on YouTube and so on, but the international part is a little bit unique. You get to hear stories from people who do it on a day-to-day basis. So I thought our listeners might find this topic interesting. So you've been flying the Airbus 6-7 months now, and you've got a number of North Atlantic crossings. I flew as a first officer on 777, the 767 for a number of years doing that kind of flying. And so what do you think so far after 6-7 months of flying?
I love it. I absolutely love it. I'm having a blast doing it. I think particularly across the North Atlantic, I'm finding it to be a little busier than I anticipated sometimes. Mm-hmm. We stay pretty active watching a variety of things, which we'll touch on here. But man, I'm having a blast. It's fun not only to go to those places, but I like the 3-man crew. You got 3 people up there, so there's a little bit of a different dynamic. And
you just told me you flew a trip the other day with a female first officer and a female relief officer, and you're calling it a 3-man crew. I don't think that's accurate.
Yes, I'm old school, but neither one of them would have taken offense at that either, by the way.
Yeah.
And that's a neat dynamic, and I'll tell you where I get the most out of it. I think a lot of people would probably agree they're in this role is you get to your destination, everybody's kind of tired. You've got 3 people up there, and I love having that third person kind of watching over from the big picture, bringing things to your attention that you're not seeing,
Yes.
And that is just hugely invaluable. Going into these destinations that you don't get into a lot, you get into them fairly frequently, but they're busy places, and that happened the other day going into London, and we were, it was just a simple thing on an approach, and I forgot to do something. Hey, make sure you activate this. Oh yeah, crap, So and everything worked out great, but it's just you're thankful to have that person there.
Yeah, the extra set of eyes who's paying attention is valuable. But before we land at London, let's back up. let's start. Why does international flying go more senior at an airline? You always think of the senior pilots flying the wide body airplanes to the international destinations. Why is that?
I think it boils down to schedule and pay, really more than anything. I don't think it has anything to do with the airplane. But it's just the schedule that you get, and you're doing one leg a day because you're doing an 8, 10, 12, sometimes maybe 14, 16 hour leg. But you're doing that, and then of course the pay, and so you have a little more control, I think, over your schedule because you're not susceptible to being rerouted in the middle of your trip.
Right.
And the older you get, the less you want to put up with that.
No, I think you're right. I think that the schedule is nice, and the flying, while a common question I have always been asked is, how do you fly those long legs? I can't imagine 10 hours. Well, you alluded to it with a relief pilot, and we should probably discuss why we have a relief pilot. But with a relief pilot, you are able to get a little rest in the middle of a flight.
Touch on real quick when is one required?
Well, okay, flights. I want to say over 8 hours. It's kind of under the old rules, but in general, flights that are more than 8 hours are going to require a third pilot. So,
and then over
12, that adds another pilot. So
right.
4. So you would think, people say, well, how could you fly all the way from the United States to Narita, Tokyo, Japan, or somewhere, Hong Kong, whatever it may be? Wouldn't that just be so long? Well, when there's 4 pilots to do a 2-pilot job, it makes life easier in reality because you get a chance to rest, take a nap, just take your brain off of the flying for a few minutes. And so there are rest facilities on these airplanes. Our listeners may or may not know that most wide-body airplanes come with a rest facility. In the case of the 777, depends on the model. There's 2 bunks that are right behind the cockpit on the 200. On the 300, they're up above the first class cabin. This is for pilots. There's also flight attendants have a rest facility at the aft part of the 777-300. Again, up above the aft part of coach. What about on the Airbus?
Yeah, it's ours are downstairs, so they're mid cabin. Some of them are all the way back, but they're downstairs, and we've got 2. It depends on the airplane. The 300s are our original 300s are a shorter range airplane, so we only got 1 bunk down there. But we have some later model 300s, our 200s, and our new ones, the 900s, have 2 bunks with a chair. So you got a chair you can either sit down in, and which occasionally, if I'm not tired, I'll do that, and I'll read a book or maybe even watch a movie or something, because you're totally off duty there. Take your shirt off and relax a little bit. But most of the time, we've got bedding. It's the same bedding that at least for us, we use in first class.
Right. Nice. Yep.
So we got a nice pillow, a nice blanket. Go down there, and I'll take a nap if I can.
Yeah, I'm good at sleeping on an airplane, it turns out. Another aspect that I think makes it go more senior, and people don't immediately think of this, is you have I jokingly say a cast of thousands to do a job that domestically you would not have that kind of help. First off, just thinking of the cockpit and with the extra, with the relief officer or sometimes 2 relief officers, someone, that individual can go do the walk around and kind of get the airplane ready while the other pilots are planning. Now there is a little more flight planning goes on. We'll talk about that in a bit, but so you're dividing the duties in that regard.
That's
at
right.
least that was something I found. And the second thing, at least at the airlines that I've flown international for, the lead flight attendant, which on the international side at Brand X we refer to as a purser.
We do too.
The pursers are typically a little more. How would I say it? You have to be careful. I don't want to.
They got more training.
Yeah, they get more training, and they seem to care a little more. I don't want to disparage any, because there's plenty of good flight attendants, but they do seem to take their role a little more seriously in terms of they take care of a lot of the stuff that you as a captain would otherwise have to worry about, customs related things and
right.
And dealing with passenger matters, and they just do a really nice job. I think I have a very high opinion of most pursers.
Yeah, Yeah, I do too. They make it a little easier. You know, they're the ones that are making sure you get fed.
Yes.
You know, and all that stuff.
And
as
that's
well.
a great point, because they do take the time to worry about you getting fed, as opposed to just, oh yeah, I forgot about that, as you sometimes run into in
Right.
the domestic.
But they're busy up there. I mean, they
yes.
are, you know, in those international flying first class, if you've had the privilege of sitting up there, you see how much those people work. They're going at it all the time. And when you don't see them, generally they're back there in the galley prepping your stuff.
Prepping your stuff. That's exactly right.
So they're working hard. But yeah, you're right. I think I look at them as kind of, you know, they're generally a notch above. I mean, they got to be selected for that. They got to pass all the stuff, you know, that the company puts on them, and I know that that not all of them make it through that program.
And they take pride in their job. They really do. And so that is another aspect, I think, of why ultimately this kind of flying goes senior.
Yeah.
So I briefly touched on it. How do you let's say you get to the airport, you're going to start your trip, and you're there an hour and a half prior, however long it is. What do you do when you meet the other pilots, and what happens?
So so when we're starting a trip, we get there. Our sign in for an international is an hour and a half prior. Is that what you guys?
No, believe it or not, still an hour.
Oh, really?
But I would say the vast majority of pilots show up well ahead of that 1 hour point, at least hour 20 or something. So.
Yeah. We look at, we'll sit down we got briefing rooms for this. We sit down and we'll go through, I just kind of go over anything that may be a little unusual. You know, we'll take a look at the weather and the ride. If there's something that's kind of out there, we'll give the dispatcher a call and get a conference call just to get that person's opinion on stuff. And that's not real often. Some people like to do it every flight. I don't really see the need to do it, but you know, if it's something weird, you know, you get some weather out in, you know, the middle of the tracks or something, you know, talk to them. And then, you know, you're just verifying, you know, just general overhead questions. Hey, nobody forgot their passport. You know,
yes,
you got all that kind of stuff going on. There's we look at the track message, which is you know, there are tracks, which are routes that go over both the Atlantic and the Pacific that are set day to day, and they're a series of latitude, longitude waypoints that connect together. And so, like, I think the other day we were coming back on track uniform, you're verifying that those waypoints are the same as what your flight plan is showing, and that you're looking at the correct day, because they do change by day and by altitude and by direction.
Right.
So we're doing that. And then I generally like to, if I can, finish all that up early enough, and I'll jump over to the flight attendant lounge and, you know, introduce myself and just talk to them, and just a couple my little pet peeves we'll talk about, you know, and I just want to make sure. I like putting my eyes on each one of them. We have generally 10 that we fly with. And so I like to see who's who and where they are at, you know.
Well, right, because in reality, you may not see, they're in the back of the airplane, and you may not see them till you get on the bus at the destination.
Yeah.
Isn't that correct? So it's nice to see them in it.
And, you know, just for as much as anything else, I want to kind of peek at them, and if we have to evacuate and get out of that airplane, I kind of want to know who I'm looking for.
Right.
You know, I'm not sure I would remember, but at least I'll have some memory of that.
Right.
And I like taking care of the flight attendants. I really do, because they, you know, most people are sitting back there kind of taking them for granted, and they, in fact, I make a PA every time, and the flight attendants usually comment on it. And I don't do it for the comment, but I just like to make sure that people understand that, hey, when you're back there, treat these people like you want to be treated at work, and that goes a long way in helping them have a good flight and everybody else.
Right. There's too much going on in the industry today that it's just unfortunate. Anyway, so you finish playing, go out to the airplane, and now I think it kind of operates like a normal flight at that point. You download your route and you get set up for the route. Is there anything special?
Well, you touched on it, Todd, and I'd like to know if you guys do it any different. But, you know, all this starts with the dispatcher, right? So the dispatcher's putting together your flight plan and all this stuff. And so you're also dealing a lot with maintenance, because unlike a domestic airplane, you won't go out with very many deferrals, open maintenance items on an international flight. The more has to be working on an international airplane than on a domestic airplane. That's because you get out over these areas where you might be 2 or 3 hours or more away from a suitable alternate. You want to have as much working for you as you can.
Right. Part of the flight planning, and we should get into this topic now, I think, part of the planning done by the dispatcher is to look at alternates that are en route. So, in other words, unlike typically, as if we have some general aviation pilots who are listening who fly IFR regularly, they recognize that sometimes they have to file an alternate airport. Okay, that's at your destination. What we're going to refer to here are en route alternates. And that's because if one engine quits, these are all twin engine airplanes at this point, and we have rules. The acronym is ETOPS, ETOPS, Extended Twin Engine Overwater Operations. And
I'm glad you knew that, because I'm not sure I did.
Engines turn or people swim. That's it.
There you go.
What would be some typical alternate recent flights that you've flown to Europe? What are some of the en route alternates? Let's talk about.
So it's going to depend on how far north or south you're going. If you're going really far north, you're going to have probably like Goose Bay, Canada. You're going to have Reykjavik, Iceland. It seems like Shannon, Ireland's always on there. A little further south, you might have the Azores. You might have Bermuda. But these are all those, if we're doing an ETOPS 180, if we're filed under ETOPS 180, that's 180 minutes that we have to be within 180 minutes of one engine operation to that
suitable airport. So if the forecast at that airport doesn't meet, you couldn't get in the airport at that time when you're going to go by it, then that's not a suitable alternate, and that presents planning challenges for the dispatcher.
And the reality of it is, you may not use that one anyway, but it has to be there for planning. If something happened, you may decide, I don't want to go there, I want to go somewhere else.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That starts to touch on why the captain, most time life's going to be pretty easy, but that one time when things go awry, you're going to have some decisions to make.
And maybe it's because I'm still fairly new in this, but I spend a lot of time looking at weather at those places, and looking at how far we are from those places, and just kind of thinking about, all right, if we have to do this, what are we going to do? Where are we going to go? Because sometimes, like in Iceland, the winds are so awful. You don't necessarily want to go up that way.
As a whole aside, that was one of the best things about all the years in the C-130. All those airports they're just 4-letter identifiers to many pilots flying across the North Atlantic. If you were a C-130 guy for a lot of years, you
were there.
They were all places I've been. Every one of those you mentioned a minute ago. Goose Bay, Keflavik Lodges, Halifax, St. John's, Shannon, Prestwick. They're all places I went into in the C-130. It was many of them multiple times. So I always enjoyed that, thinking about that, because they were such fun places when you got to visit them. But so assuming the flight goes along as planned, what's it like taking off out of Atlanta or Minneapolis or Dallas Fort Worth or wherever it may be initially? I'll just say, to me, it's just pretty much like a domestic flight initially. So
not that those locations would have anything to do with Brand X or Brand Y.
Maybe we should say, I can't even say Chicago, Denver.
So say the question again.
Why? What? initially, as you're on taking off and en route, it's kind of like just flying a normal domestic flight. You're talking to Chicago Center or whomever you're talking to. But beyond that, what happens?
Well, it depends. It depends kind of the timing, whether you're eastbound or westbound. So if you're taking off, if you're taking off out of the U.S., you have a little bit more time, especially where we are, to deal with stuff. But you're taking off out of Europe and headed back, you have to get your oceanic clearance, and depending on which sector or which controlling authority you're going through, determines on how much earlier, prior to entering those tracks that we mentioned, you can get that clearance. So that's one of those things.
Right. I think that. So, what I was thinking about was, you end up talking to Canadian Air Traffic Control, Moncton or Gander, prior to that Toronto, whomever. As you approach the ocean, and when Chris says the tracks, he's talking about the part of the flight that crosses the North Atlantic. And I'm kind of thinking about starting in the U.S. and flying to Europe. Obviously, it's kind of the opposite coming back, and we're not even talking about going over the Pacific at this point. But when you're approaching those tracks, you cannot fly out in the ocean without a clearance. It's a very controlled environment out there. It's a non-radar environment. It's very controlled. So they want separation between airplanes at the same altitude, or they need altitude separation.
Right. So
you have to get a clearance. It may be what you filed, or it may not be what you filed. So how do you get that clearance, though? I mean, just talk to the same guy, or you talk to somebody different?
Well, we send ours in through CPDLC. So
I can't even spell CPDLC.
I know. I heard a guy say it wrong the other day, and I was like, "Okay, is that right?" I was trying to figure it out. So CPDLC means what?
Controller, pilot, data link. Communications.
Yeah. So it's a texting method, essentially, direct to the ATC centers or with a facility, and there's a lot of pre-populated things that we can ask, so it makes the communication easier. But it's just a way to communicate. So that's how we get our clearance. We do it via CPDLC. Yeah. We put it in there, we send it in, and we can do it as a backup over voice, which takes a little bit more time because they got to read everything to you. But that's how we get ours. Is that the way you guys were doing it?
Oh yeah. CPDLC came around in the I don't know, it probably goes back to the early 2000s. I'm guessing on that. I got plenty of clearances via voice, both in the C-130 and then on the old days on the 767, back at TWA in 2000, 2001 when I was flying international there. But once CPDLC came around, it got a lot easier. So that's how we typically you're going to get a clearance. It may be what you filed. The company wanted you on track Bravo, what it may not be. Maybe on track Charlie or something.
And that's where it gets a little more busy because now you've got to work with dispatch, getting the new clearance and and all that, and getting a new not a new clearance but a new flight plan rather.
Yes.
So see if your fuel burn is going to work out. And those initial oceanic crossing clearances will have a set Mach number, so you can't vary from that. So usually we're flying 8.2 somewhere in there, so it'll be 0.82 at whatever flight level, and then they're expecting you to hit that first point within, what's the tolerance, Todd? 2 minutes?
Three minutes.
So you got to be fairly close and accurate on that. And oftentimes you won't be at that Mach number or at that altitude when you get the clearance, but when you hit that, we call it coasting out. When you hear that, when you get that clearance at that first point, you've got to be there.
So now, you mentioned it's busy. It's surprisingly busier in the cockpit than people might think. You may just picture people just sitting around waiting until you're ready for the descent into London or wherever. No, it's actually there's a rhythm to it, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
So what are you guys doing? So that as you hit these non-radar oceanic points.
So you hit these oceanic points. It's going to determine who you're talking to, again, what sector, but via what means. So Most of the time, what you're going to do is, we've essentially got 2, if not 3 ways to communicate with the controllers. We've got VHF if we still have it. So Iceland, if we're in the airspace, we're almost always on VHF. We've got HF as a backup. As part of HF, we've got
HF being high frequency.
High frequency, right? And then we've got what's the third I'm thinking of here?
CPDLC.
CPDLC, right. And so what'll happen is the controller will give you a high frequency and then a backup high frequency to monitor, and then you'll monitor them and you'll check in with them, and then while you're doing that as well, once you enter the tracks, you're going to potentially offset from the track itself. So we may not be flying exactly on the track. We can offset up to 2 miles to the right, and generally we're kind of looking at who's in front of us or who's behind us.
Why would you offset? I mean, don't you always want to fly the black line, so to speak?
Well, there's a lot of airplanes out there.
Yes.
And you'll see if you take time away from your movie and open your blind up and you look out there when you're over the North Atlantic, you're likely to see other airplanes. Some of them passing each other up,
it is kind of
opposite
crazy.
direction.
Right.
And some of them, like the other day, it's not uncommon. We had one passing us. In fact, it was one of you guys' triples going underneath us, 1,000 feet below us, and setting off our radar altimeter.
That's pretty cool. Right under, yep.
Yeah, and that was fun to watch. So there's a lot of that, but you're going to offset for several reasons. I like looking at it initially. Okay, what are the winds, and what's the potential we're going to get into this guy's wake?
That's
the guy
the real
behind
issue,
us,
right? The wake turbulence.
And the other is if something happens, one of the things that we have to do on a if you have a contingency or an emergency, you're going to even deviate a little further to the right of those tracks before you can start descending. And so a lot of people like to but to offset that full 2 miles because it puts them closer to that 5 mile point if they have to descend.
And the reason why would you have to descend?
You got an emergency. You've got something going on. You've got a cabin pressurization. You've lost an engine. And now you're going to have to start diverting. You just can't, on those tracks, start turning willy-nilly to wherever you're going because of all the traffic that's out there.
Right. Because the tracks now, they were just, when we talk about these tracks, pre-designated each day by people who do this for a living in Gander, Canada. The tracks historically were 60 miles apart. And we talk about Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. So Alpha's furthest north, then Bravo, 60 miles south. Charlie is 60 miles further south. Well, now they've gone to half tracks. So now they're only 30 miles apart. And again, it is non-radar. ADS-B, I know you can, if you're on FlightAware or Flight Radar 24, you can look and see airplanes out there. That's all, I guess, satellite, ADS-B. I'm not even sure how those are picked up now, but that's not really directly an air traffic control function. It's still done, considered like non-radar. So it is important that you are where you say you are.
Yeah.
And when you'll be there.
You'll be there.
Yes.
So now not only are you listening to, you've got your high frequency radio, you've got maybe a VHF, but you have typically your number one comm tuned on a VHF to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is kind of the common frequency. So you'll hear chatter back and forth but it's just between airplanes. Chatter between airplanes about weather, about what's their ride, any other number of things. And then you're also monitoring 21.5 for emergency freaks. So you've got a lot of frequencies that you're sitting there and potentially listening to.
Right. And the HF frequencies vary depending on atmospheric conditions. Thankfully, so it might be, if the sun's up higher, typically it's a higher number. It might be 1, gosh, I'm spacing off some of the typical, I heard these things for years.
Yeah.
1129
275 maybe, or
11. Anyway, and they get at night and they tend to be lower, like 6, like a 4-digit one, 6 point something. And thankfully we don't. There's a lot of static on an HF radio, so thankfully you don't have to listen to those all the time. Because how will the controller, if they want to contact you, how are they going to contact? Because you're not listening to any controllers as you fly along.
Right.
Remember, we're using that CPDLC, so they may contact you via that. But if that doesn't work, how else do they contact?
One of the reasons you're checking in with them on high frequency, not only for voice backup, but it's what we call cell call. Right? So cell call, each airplane has a specific identifier. It's a four-letter identifier. So your cell call code might be Alpha Charlie Delta Quebec or something like that. And so once you check in, the controller knows that. It's specific to that airplane. They will kind of ping you. They'll send a message which causes your unit in the airplane to I don't want to say alarm, but to notify you. It sends a notification.
Effectively, it dings. It's selective calling is what cell call is short for.
As soon as that cell call ding comes in, you verify it with them, a couple other little things, and then you turn your radios down because, like Todd said, there's a lot of static, and that's, to me, I don't know about you, but that's very fatiguing to listen to. It's awful.
I did probably 100 Atlantic crossings in the C-130, and the entire time wearing David Clark headsets and listening to the whole time.
Oh my gosh!
Because we did not have cell call in the C-130, so you just had to sit there and listen to it, keep it turned down, and
you guys didn't have CPDLC on the 130 either, yeah.
No. And of course, a lot of stuff a lot of that flying, I was doing it in the 90s even, and so it wasn't, they didn't even have it yet. Nobody had it. And the frequencies got so busy, it was almost impossible. There were times you just couldn't get a word in. Just crazy how busy the frequencies got to be. And they'd be even worse today because there's so many airplanes. Again, I referenced Flight Radar 24 or Flight Aware. If you go look at a typical, pick it any time, just look at all the airplanes crossing the Atlantic at one moment. It's shocking how many airplanes are out there. And in general, the majority of eastbound flights depart late in the afternoon or early, or into the evening. So you'll see all these flights eastbound at that time. Meanwhile, all the westbound flights tend to depart in the morning from Europe, coming back throughout the day, daytime flying.
Okay, so Todd's talking about coming back from Europe on daytime flying. If you didn't hear it in the past, just a little bit ago, we had the wonders of doing a podcast at home today, and with the dog barking in the background. So anyway, we took care of that.
When are you going to build a professional studio for us?
I know. So anyway, you're talking about coming back during the day with the daytime flying.
I was talking about on Flight Aware, you can look and see all the airplanes eastbound at night and westbound during the day. And this has been doing it this way forever. I'm sure many of our listeners have traveled to Europe at some point, recognize that you get to Europe typically in the morning, and then coming back because of the time change, maybe you're leaving at 11 in the morning and you're getting back at 2 in the afternoon into the United States. It kind of works out nicely. So, I mean, those are some of the operational aspects. It'd be hard to cover every airport in Europe, how they do things differently, just because it would take us too long. But let's talk maybe for a little bit about kind of the fun of when you get there. What are you thinking about? Even flying in, what are you looking for? What's been unique in your experience
in terms of just the procedures going?
Differences.
Well, obviously the language. Language is always a challenge, and that's what's nice having 3 people up there, so somebody can say,
"What did he say?"
What was that? Sometimes I think, frankly, the Brits are the hardest to understand. I don't know why, but I can pick up the Dutch controllers. I can generally
they're pretty good.
Figure it out. The French, I can figure them out, but the Brits are sometimes it's like he's speaking English. I didn't understand a bit of that.
I found the French to be the hardest.
Yeah.
So. I don't know. It just depends. You get used to it, though. You do develop an ear over the course of time. You start to be able to pick it up.
Yeah. There's just different procedures, going in there, like especially in London where they're really big on the constant descent angles. They want you to not have the power up very much, and so they're expecting you to fly constantly down and not level off. You got a lot of that stuff. You got most European places anymore, they want you to fly 160 knots until you're 4 miles out, and and they track that pretty closely. I know we've got competitions among the fleets to see who's the most compliant on that.
The other thing about London that I've always found interesting is you're going to hold going into London almost always, but it's by design. It's just the way they meter the traffic in, and it's really a pretty nice system when you get right down to it. It works pretty well. You just get in this big holding pattern, and you might be in it for 20 minutes. You might be in one turn. It can go very quickly or take a while.
Heathrow's, I think it's still the busiest European airport, isn't it? And they've only got 2 runways.
Yeah. Yep. And you do got to fly the speeds as you referenced, 160 to a 4 mile final, and you'll fly with guys that want to cheat for some reason. It's not necessary to slow down early or anything like that. It just follow the procedures. It works out real nice.
Yeah. Well, and your airplanes tattle on you anymore anyway. So as soon as we change anything, they know.
Right.
So it gets reported. So
right.
But the point is they want you. It helps them meter that traffic. They've got to get a certain number of airplanes in and out of there. And when you don't follow that, it kind of trickles down the line, and now all of a sudden, the 10th guy down the line, he's holding when maybe he didn't have to, or he's holding for a little bit longer.
Right. And then once you land, you're going to have to clear customs, just like the passengers. What are some other unique things about?
Well, I still am pretty convinced that if they drop me off at the gate, and between getting to the gate and getting to the bus, if I was all by myself, I'm not sure I could still figure out how to get there.
Some of them are hard. Some of these airports,
man, they're just. I'm glad there's other people there.
There's always somebody that's done it before.
Yeah, yes. Convoluted, and thankfully in London's easy because they pick us right up by the airplane. We just go down on a bus right there. I notice you guys do that too.
Oh yeah.
But that's not that's not the case in Paris or other places, Amsterdam or
Frankfurt.
Yep.
So once here, when you get to the hotel, so now I'm flying a narrow body airplane to get around the U.S. and a little bit of international, but not over the Atlantic. I fly with first officers that are thinking about bidding the wide body, or should they upgrade to domestic captain. And I always encourage them to bid international, because I think first off, you're going to get some experience that will help you down the road later when you're going to be an international captain. It's better to have the experience as a first officer. But the other thing I always bring up is the 2 most important things I always felt on an international flight, particularly to Europe. And this is the way I describe it to first officers. I say, when you get to the hotel, you're going to get your room. That's another thing. Pursers, typically, they handle all that, takes that load off of the pilots. They're getting the room set up and all that. And then once you get to your hotel room, I say that the second most important thing you're going to do the entire trip is set an alarm for about 3 hours after you have got to your hotel room. So you get, it takes maybe 30 minutes to get
right,
but you're exhausted. You want to go to sleep, so you're going to go to sleep. You're going to sleep for 2.5. I don't know how long do you usually sleep?
Well, that's just it. That's about right. If it's about 3 hours, if I go much more, I think last time I did 4, and it worked out pretty good. But that was
pushing it.
It was
right.
Pushing it. We got in really early.
Okay, it depends on the layover. Yeah.
Yep.
At the time you get there and all that. But so the second most important thing you're going to do in your entire trip is set an alarm. The most important thing you're going to do on the entire trip is get yourself out of bed when the alarm goes off. Because there's been many a time when I've thought to myself, there is no way that I can do this right now. I cannot. I only slept for 2.5 hours, whatever it was. All I want to do is sleep. But if you don't sleep, if you do sleep, you stay in bed, then you're not going to sleep that night.
That's the
period.
challenge
you
right
will
there.
not sleep that night. So,
And sometimes it's based on what you've been out eating or how late you were, or sometimes it's just your body. You know, the last trip I think I slept 5 hours before report. You know, I woke up and I laid there and rolled, tossed, turned. Finally, I turned a movie on.
yes. Yeah, sometimes you just give in. You're better off to give in.
Yeah.
But if you sleep 5 hours, that's a pretty good night.
It's not bad.
It's not bad. And then again, on the way back, you're going to get your break, like we've talked about, having a relief officer. So you're going to get a couple hour nap en route, which helps a bunch.
Get out of the room. You know, that's the thing. So, like, sometimes if you have a later departure, maybe it's an 11 or 12 o'clock departure, I'll try to stay up until maybe 1 o'clock local time or later.
That's 1 a.m.
So, you know, it might be my body time still might only be 6 or 7 p.m.
I guess we shouldn't assume this, but people may not realize most of these layovers, certainly not all of them, there's definitely exceptions, but the majority of international layovers are in the 24-hour range.
Yep.
Might be 25 or 26 hours, might be a little shorter. Occasionally we have some weird flights that are a much shorter layover, but just the way the time change works and the eastbound in the evenings and westbounds in the morning works is that you're gonna have a 24-hour layover. So in that 24 hours, you're going to take that nap. You're going to have a night's sleep, and the rest of the time's going to be your time to go out and wander around, get some exercise, tour a museum, have a nice dinner, whatever you do.
Yeah, and there's tons to do. That's for sure. There's tons to do, but mitigating the effects of too much sleep, like you're touching on, is one of the most important things.
Exactly.
I think, and getting out of that room and walking and. You know, and there's, I tell you anymore, there's some really cool apps. I've been sharing these with people. There's 2 apps that I've got. One's called Traces of War, and wherever you are, it will show you a map, and you can also put a list out of where any number of things. It could be an actual battle site. It could be just a grave. It could be just a historical marker, you know. Might be a statue or something like that.
Sure.
And so I try to go find some of those. I went the other day in London and found a church that had been largely destroyed, and they rebuilt it after a bomb hit across the street, a German bomb. And I thought that was kind of neat. So I walked for quite a while to go find that.
That's interesting. I wish I'd have known about that when I was still flying that stuff.
Yeah.
Because.
And then the other one I found the other day, and this was actually a guy that I went through, Wade, that I went through training with. He was showing me this. And it's called, what it does is it gives you a voice map. There we go, voice map. And what voice map does is it gives you audio tours that are geo-referenced. So you can go see things and listen, you know, put your earbuds in or whatever, and you'll get a tour from a local historian that's narrating it. And one of the neater things about it is if you're like, you know, you're in France and you're standing in front of this thing and it's French and you can't read it, well, that app, they're translating it in English to you so
that's
you can see
fantastic.
it. And that's not free. It's free to download. Each one is like $7 if you want to go on a tour. And the tours last, I think, from a half hour. I've seen them up to an hour and a half.
Okay.
So that's something that's kind of cool, too. So there's tons to do.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Well, Todd, I think we're getting close to that 45-minute mark, and probably time we start wrapping this up. There's so much more that we could talk about. You know, one thing we didn't touch on was international fuel requirements and how designating alternates is so much different. You know, we didn't talk about some of the passenger issues that we face on these 8 plus hour flights, because it's pretty common that something's going on in the back, medical wise. There's just a lot of that, so maybe we can do that at a different time.
Yeah, that's right. We medical diverts. We never got into the concept of the Pacific flying because it is different than Atlantic flying.
Yeah.
There's a lot of topics. It's a great lifestyle. I miss it a lot. I am hoping to get back to doing that kind of flying down the road for sure. It's just what I enjoy.
Yeah.
Sounds like you do too.
I do. It is fun. And anyway, if you have any questions or want to just talk airplanes with us, want to talk about airplane sales or acquisitions, that's what we do. You can email us, Chris or Todd, at flywildblue.com. That's our website as well, flywildblue.com. Our phone number is 888-773-4249. And we really appreciate you listening. Make sure you tell other people about it if you would, and if you haven't already subscribed on your preferred podcast platform, please be sure to do that. Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Blue Podcast. Find us online at flywildblue.com, and don't forget to subscribe and share.